In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, welcome to another session of lessons from my mother. I'm wearing sunglasses because I'm in my hotel in Reading, and the light is the light is just glaring at me. So I have to put these on, but then I can't connect. So I suppose I'll have to do the presentation with this Clint Eastwood type of take your last breath, punk kind of perspective. Um, I'm in the city of Reading for a conference, and I'll be here for a couple of days. So this lighting is something that we'll have to put up with for a while. Um, Welcome to another session of lessons from my mother. We're on lesson number 36. We are back from Saudi, and where my birthday happened just a couple of days ago. So thank you to all the people who wished me. I'm going to respond to each and every one of you. Thank you so much for taking the time out and wishing me. I'm very grateful. Um, uh, I feel exactly the same. I don't feel any different. But the thing that has changed in me is after going to Saudi Arabia, it was just an unreal experience, and I'm grateful I had the chance to do it with my mother and my father. And if you go a couple of videos ago, you can see my mom and I sitting in Medina and doing one of the videos, and then the next one we did when we came back. So I'm very, very grateful, and there are certain changes that I'm making in my life since going to Saudi, and I hope they stick. And maybe one of them might be that I keep my hair really, really short and try my best to go back for the Umrah and the pilgrimage as much as I can. But today's lesson is something that now people are saying a lot, particularly this wonderful fellow called Simon Sinek, who became very, very popular amongst students and young adults. I think in the last 2 years or so, because he was giving a presentation. I can't remember the exact topic of his presentation, but I remember that he was trending a lot in the student and young adult circles, where they said, "Oh, Simon is saying something." I think he was saying something about millennials and work ethic and how the previous generation has made life difficult for millennials and so on and so forth, and how millennials and Gen Z can learn to thrive in today's business environment. But one of the things he also says is this, which my mother has said for the longest times, particularly to me, because I'm an overly excited, enthused kind of a person, mellowed down in my age now, in my mid 30s, but as a younger person, I was always ready to answer all the questions and just wanted all the spotlight. And now I have to consciously say, okay, don't raise your hand, don't answer questions. Even at the conference today, I wanted to say so much, but I thought, no, I'll wait. I'll wait my turn. I'll ask my question at the end. And what that allows you to do is many things, which I'll go through. But my mum used to give the example of two doctors, because my parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, everyone is a medical doctor. So they would give examples from the hospital or conferences. And she would give the example of this lady called Dr. Farah, or Farah, as we say in Urdu. And what would happen is um, senior doctors would be going around asking questions, and the junior doctors would be sitting, or it would be a mixed batch. And they'd say, "Oh, so what do you think about this diagnosis and this and that?" And that's how doctors can discuss diagnoses, prognoses, and cures, and so forth. It's a dynamic science. It's not set in stone, because many times there's not just one single differential diagnosis. It's many different ones. So they discuss it. And my mum used to talk about Dr. Farah, I think 20, 25 years ago. And she said that they'd ask us questions and we just give like a brief answer, or they'd say, "Does anybody have any opinion?" And sometimes I'd raise my hand, sometimes somebody else would raise their hands, and they'd contribute something. And Dr. Farah would just be quiet, and she'd sit either in the front row or in the second to front. She'd just sit quietly. And then nearing the end of the whole session, the invigilator or the speaker would say, "Does anybody else have anything to add?" And then Dr. Farah would say, "Yeah, I'd like to say something." And then she'd stand up and she'd say, thank you to blah 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 who spoke before her, and thank you, and she'd thank everybody for speaking, and then she'd start gently making her points while rounding their points. I really liked what Dr. Nasrian said about anemia and anemic patients, and I also agree that we should do this. And I really like what Dr. Fazana said about this is. And I really like what Dr. Pasha said about this is. I also think we should, and she'd round everything up from the people, and everybody would just wait and watch her speak. The people whose points she was acknowledging, they would feel another validation. Oh, wow, my point has been raised by somebody else. My voice has validity. But what she was doing, if I were to consider it through a nefarious lens, is usurping other people's points. And people do it in all sorts of discussions. We do it in academia all the time. We always say, "Oh, let me just piggyback on what you just said." Oh, just to build upon that. It's, "Oh, let me take. I see your point, and I raise you another point." We do it all the time. If you want to look at it nefariously, it's usurping somebody else's point. You're using somebody else's idea to kind of jumpstart your own. But if you look at it positively, you're validating the other person, you're including them in your point, and you are building ideas through consensus, which is a very fine social and professional technique. In every setting, it helps. I can't think of a single setting unless the idea is to come up with brand new, novel ideas. Apart from that, this technique works everywhere. That you round up other people's ideas and you speak in the end. Then my mum used to give the example of one of my father's closest colleagues, Dr. Harun Awan, and he would do the same thing. He'd wait. He'd know the material back and forth. He'd know it like the back of his hand, and he'd wait for people to say, "Does anybody else have anything to add?" Because that's what we do. At the end of every gathering or every session, we say, "Does anybody have anything else to add?" The professor did it today, who's running the conference, and I think I was the second last person to put my hand up, and I asked some very sharp questions. I'm glad we had a lovely dialogue going on. And Dr. Haroon would go, "Yes, I'd like to say something," and without asking that, "Can I come on stage?" or "Can I?" He'd get up off his seat, grab his papers, and stand in front of the crowd and say, I want to address these few points. Well, Dr. Pasha said this, blah, 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 blah. And I agree with this part, but I think perhaps we need to think further on this part. And Dr. Minto said this, and I really agree with him and blah, 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 but perhaps we can develop this. And he would round up, but also find misgivings or areas of improvement in everybody else's idea and contribute. And then he'd round it all up. So overall, I think this is what we need to be doing. And everybody will be like, yeah, yeah. Because most people, unless you are very convinced on your position, you don't say, "No, I don't agree with you. I'm going to argue this point right now at the end of the meeting." Most people, because of um, social behavior, because of the importance or priority of raising your point, people don't really do these things. They say, "Oh, yeah, he raised my point. Okay, maybe he added a bit. I'm not going to argue this." But what that does for that person is establishes them in a leadership position where you've taken everybody else's idea, taken it on board, and added to it, added value to them, added value to the group, and then summed it all up. So you wait till the end and then you add things. For somebody like me, I mean, I've learned much more, but when I was younger, I needed to jump in every opportunity to just answer questions in class or wherever and just to showcase, "Oh, I know the answer." And my mum used to tell me this thing, and I think around 10, 12, she sat me down and said, "Do you know this answer?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Just because you know it, does it mean you have to say it to everyone?" I said, "Yeah." The teacher asked me. She said, "No, no. Giving the answer in class doesn't add to your final score in the exam, does it?" I said, "No." She said, "There's no viva." I said, "No." She said, "There's no interview." No. Then what value does it add to you when you just give all the answers in class? And I said, "I don't know." And she said, "I'll tell you. It makes you look good in front of your friends and in front of the teacher. That's the value. In terms of information or knowledge or learning, it's not helping you. It's your it's one method of showing off, hey, I know the answer. Do you really want to do that? Do you really want to be the person who takes the opportunity to showcase their intelligence? But when it comes to the exam, or when it comes to the test, or when it comes to where you actually need to deliver, then other people will end up doing better than you. And that would happen. I would get third position or fourth position as opposed to the first one because I would be busy like, oh, I know all the answers. And the teacher would be like, oh, you know all the answers. But when it came crunch time for the exam or for projects, I wouldn't know all the answers. I'd make some mistakes, careless mistakes. And she said, look, rather than contributing your energies in looking good in class, why don't you put your energy in knowing the material really well and putting all that energy in the exam paper or in the project? Because that way you're actually adding value to your life rather than, oh yeah, I knew the answers, I raised my hand the most. That doesn't really do much for you, does it? At 10, I didn't understand what she was saying. At 11, it started sinking in more, and over time, it sank in more and more and more. And it kept continuing till university because I'm a full extrovert. And every opportunity I get, I want to like express and share and discuss and dialogue, all of those things. And I love speaking to other students. If they raise a point and I say, can I just, and I love that collaborative conversation but it doesn't really add much value in terms of delivering in academic tests or coursework unless you have a discussion and you go write it down or somebody sometimes clarifies a point for you but that's such a rarity. So my mum saw this in me and then she started telling me, look, there's Dr. Farah, Dr. Haroon, there's other doctors as well who wait till the end. And then there was this lovely fellow in my year when I was in year 5, 6, 7, 8, till I left that school. His name was Adam Zaman. Adam was very tall, um, and he had a very high pitched voice, like this. He would speak like this. I remember he was even taller than my mum in like year 5, and I'd be like, "Wow, Adam, you're such a giant." And Adam would crush all of us. I would get second position in class, so I'd have like 87, 88%. And Adam would be 96% or 97. He'd be so far ahead that the second, third, fourth, fifth positions would be like this, and he'd be far ahead. And my mum would come and see him and be like, "Oh, such a good boy. Look after my son, share with him," because she was like, "He's the high achiever. My friend, if my son befriends him, he can adopt similar habits and so forth." That's a very fine strategy, and it worked because I never saw Adam jumping up to answer questions in class. Adam would just sit, and he'd sit like this, and he'd finish all the classwork faster than everyone. I don't know why he did it. Such a show off, Adam. Wherever you are, I'd punch you in the face. But but in all seriousness, he would finish and just sit like this, and the teacher would be like, "Adam, why aren't you working?" He was like, "I finished." She's like, "You finished? Show me." And she'd look at him, she's like, "This is all correct. How do you do it?" I was like, I knew the answers. I solved the questions. And she said, "Okay, just go sit down." And he'd go sit down and just put his head in his hand like this and just wait for the class to catch up. Um, and then the teacher started knowing, oh, this fellow is the topper. He finishes very quickly. He doesn't jump up to answer. But if you ask Adam a question, oh, he would stand up because he was very tall. So he would stand up and he'd lean on the table, he'd lean on the desk, sorry, and he'd start saying, "Miss or sir, I think this, I think this, I think," and he would list all the answers. And we would know, most of the class would know the first few lines, and he would know like a page, and he'd just say it verbally. And we were like, how does he do that? Which book did he read that in? And then later, when we became better friends, he said, "Look, here's a textbook, here's everything in the textbook, here's a summary of the textbook. I read this, then I read that, and I memorize this, and I memorize that." I was like, when do you get time to do that? There's so much time. After school, I come home and I just memorize. And I just study and I memorize. And I study and memorize. And he ended up going to the National University of Singapore, which is a top 20 university. Very good school. But I haven't kept in touch with him. Absolutely wonderful fellow. So my mum would see him and say, "Look, Look at what he's doing. He's not wasting energy where it's not needed to be wasted. He's contributing his efforts where he's supposed to deliver at the exams, at the tests. So I would get 24.5 out of 25 on test, math, history, whatever. And there would be two or three others, and I'm like, how much did you get? You 24.5? Me too. And we do that. And they were like, Adam? I was like, 25. What did you do that I didn't? And you look at his paper, and the writing would be like an animal because he was a horrible penmanship. But you'd look at his answers and you say, yeah, yeah, his paper's better than mine. Oh, you jackass. And we'd be really annoyed with him, but he would just deliver where it was required. And if asked a question, he would answer. Otherwise, just quiet and just sitting like this in the background. And my mum said, look, in this race, the academic race, jumping up in class and showcasing your knowledge adds no value. Look at the people who are doing the best, who are going to utilize those big opportunities. Are they doing this? No, they're not. Try to follow that model. And she'd counsel me on this so much that I started realizing, okay. And with age, this exuberant enthusiasm was channeled. And I said, okay, I will show enthusiasm when the question is asked. Otherwise, I'll sit quietly and I'll watch and I'll nod and I'll agree. But as soon as the teacher asks me a question directly, I'd say, well, I think this, and I agree with her and him and that and this, and I think this is a great idea. But if I could add something, it would be this. Little did I know that working in academia now, that is exactly what we do. We conduct a thorough literature review on what exists right now in a particular domain. So we say, okay, global value chains are governed like this. And Gireffi said this, and Buckley said this, and Nerula said this, and blah, blah, blah said this. And this is the landscape. I agree with all of these people. This person's point of view could be developed a bit further, and I'm adding this in that value. And that's a whole new paper. That's a whole new direction of research. You can do the same when it comes to consulting. You can do the same when it comes to medicine. You can do the same when it comes to architecture. So I started realizing, wow, this model is something that is incredibly useful for your professional life. And because she had instilled it in me from a young age, it's always been there. And I sit back, and the confident, exuberant, enthusiastic tyrant in me wants to take the spotlight at once. But I sit calmly and I say, no. I know I can take it whenever I want to. I know I can. What's the point? There is no point in taking it. Let's add value by actually adding value, and let's learn from the people around us and see how we can contribute. So this is another lesson, and I was glad to see when Simon Sinek started talking about it, about leaders speaking last, and waiting and developing and listening, because he championed listening a lot. My mother didn't emphasize listening when she was teaching me this lesson, because perhaps she was trying to aim for parsimony, like something that's easy to understand and easy to follow. But now, if I ask her about it, she'd say, yeah, definitely, it's about listening and building and developing yourself and not trying to hog the spotlight. Let your work speak for you. Don't try to speak for your work. So that's another one of her great lessons. And I'm so grateful, because last week's lesson, we both became teary-eyed, as you saw. And the week before's lesson, we were in Medina and we did a wonderful session there. So I'm so incredibly grateful that I'm able to have my mum on my videos. And I love you, Mum. You know, I do, Mama, I do anything for you. So I'm so grateful to God that He allows me the opportunities to have her on my videos and share our conversations. And I hope I can be of service. And I hope you have a long, healthy, and prosperous life, you and Abu. And I'm so grateful I was able to do that and go to Mecca with them in Medina. So yeah, this is yet another lesson from my mother. Thank you so much for joining me. I shall see you again next week. Take care and have a wonderful week.